First of all, thank you all so much for coming out today for this birthday party, as we would say back in the United States. It is wonderful to see so many nations represented here and so many who have devoted a great deal of their lives here. Here I speak to many of the civilians who are here as well. Et je crois qu'il est très important de dire un petit mot en l'autre langue officielle de notre alliance, le français. Bienvenue à notre petite célébration. C'est très important. In English, I said it is important to speak at least a little bit in the other official language of our alliance, and so I welcomed everybody again and asked for that we had a good celebration today. Let me start with one image, please. And this is a bridge. And I often speak about the importance of NATO as a bridge, and I think of SHAPE as a bridge as well. It is a bridge, first and most obviously, across the Atlantic, a transatlantic bridge. It connects the North American partners, Canada and the United States, with the 26 European partners, and indeed with all the Partnership for Peace partners, 22 of whom are part of our family inside of NATO and inside of SHAPE. Secondly, SHAPE is a cultural bridge, a linguistic bridge. Look at all of the nations that are represented here, and I can pick out 20 countries inside of a second. All of us contribute to each other in wonderful ways and learn from each other. I'll give you a practical example. A couple of weeks ago, I went to the wonderful Greek festival. This Sunday, I'm going to the Turkish Bazaar. Each of the nations is represented and shares their culture, their ideas, their backgrounds. And then thirdly, I would say that our headquarters, SHAPE and NATO, is a bridge in time. It connects this Cold War past, so much bitterness and so much anger, with a new world. Granted, there are many challenges, but I would argue that today we have much more partnership, much more cooperation, and a much enlarged family of partners. So I always begin with a bridge, and as I mentioned, this one is in Bosnia-Herzegovina, a place where SHAPE has been part of the planning and the execution. It crosses the Drina River, which is a famous river, and the story of this bridge is told in very lyrical and beautiful prose by Andro Ivic, who won a Nobel Prize for his novel, The Bridge on the Drina. So I think bridges are important, and they're a good metaphor as we start things off. Well, let me introduce you to one of my illustrious predecessors next. I hope everyone can recognize General Eisenhower. Of course, he went on to be a president of the United States, but I always like to think of him as a SACEUR. And you see him here literally signing the order which established this headquarters 60 years ago tomorrow. And I'm very privileged every morning when I come to work to sit at that desk. It resides now in the SACEUR office. And every morning when I sit in front of it, on the few mornings that I'm actually here, I am thrilled to be part of the legacy of this very, very distinguished officer with whom I share not only SACEUR but a very undistinguished hairline. But General Eisenhower signed this organization into being back, as I said, 60 years ago. 12 nations started this journey. Today we have 28. And it's been, as was mentioned, it started in a hotel in Paris. I do love that. Where did NATO begin? In a hotel in Paris. We then were happily in a headquarters, and I think that that was an important period of time. Next, please. Where you see our headquarters in France at Roquefort. And we were there actually for a fair period of time, from 51 to 67, and then moved, of course, to the building in which we reside here today. And as we got through that first part of our history at SHAPE, we welcomed some new members to the family. Greece and Turkey, first two nations that appropriately came in together in 1952. And then in a very symbolic moment, I think the Federal Republic of Germany came in 1955. And of course, we today take it so much for granted, the wonderful relationship and the centrality of Germany in this alliance. But in 1955, that was only 10 years after the end of a a devastating war on this continent. And I think that's part of the role of SHAPE and the role of NATO, to bring former foes together into what has become such a vibrant alliance. Well, what happened next? Next, please. This is an iconic picture from Checkpoint Charlie. Some of us, a few of us, are old enough to actually remember these days. I was born in 1955, so I can't honestly say I remember that particular moment. But I think all of us can understand the long history of the Cold War, what was once called the long twilight of the Cold War. For 35 years, this was the focus of this headquarters, of SHAPE. A very dangerous time. I think in many ways the world was lucky to pass through this period without suffering a devastating collision between East and West. And I think that the deterrence that this headquarters helped to build into the Cold War was part of the reason that we succeeded in avoiding a true global catastrophe of a war, of a Cold War that turned into a World War III. We avoided that, I think, and we can say here at SHAPE that we played an important part in that. Well, some good news came after that. Next, please. The fall of the wall. The fall of the wall. A year or so ago, I was in Berlin to celebrate the 20th anniversary of the fall of the wall. It was in November of 2009. The wall, of course, came down November 9th, 1989. And it was an extraordinary moment for me to think that 20 years had passed since that moment when the wall came down. Chancellor Merkel, who of course is from East Germany, spoke very movingly about the impact in Germany. And I think there's probably no more symbolic moment to the end of the Cold War than this photograph. Again, I think NATO at that point had to really reassess and think, what now is the mission going forward? And I think what I'd like to do now in just a few moments is tell the rest of that story and how it's played out here at SHAPE over the intervening years since that moment. Let's start with what happened with our relationship with Russia. Next, please. Now, some could look at that and say, Cold War photograph. Not so. This photo was taken last year in 2010. This is a Russian Federation ship, Kaliningrad, operating in an exercise called Baltic Operations with ships from many of the nations represented here at SHAPE. It's indicative of what is in the strategic concept, that we seek today to find our way to a strategic partnership with Russia. And there are many zones of cooperation that we can pursue, and exercising together like this is one of them, along with cooperation in counterterrorism, in counter-narcotics, cooperation in Afghanistan, potentially over time with missile defense. So the Cold War is over. We know that. And we have moved into an era in which we try to find ways that we can cooperate with former foes and create new partnerships. That's part of the legacy of SHAPE moving forward into this future. Next, please. Now, this is a very striking photograph. Look closely at it. It's, of course, a destroyed building, and there's a man playing a cello in the center of it. This photograph was taken in Sarajevo during the siege of Sarajevo. It lasted 4.5 years, one of the longest sieges in the history of warfare. After a bombing, in this particular photograph, this was the National Library of Sarajevo, this cellist, the cellist of Sarajevo, he was called, would come and play classical music to raise the spirits of those in the city. It's a powerful visual image of the situation that NATO and SHAPE were part of helping find a solution for over time in Bosnia-Herzegovina. I remember myself as a young commander in command of a destroyer operating under an operation called Sharp Guard, Navy operation, NATO operation in which the U.S. Navy was participating. I had a British Commodore. There were ships from all the nations operating together. Much like this auditorium, it was a place where we could exchange ideas and learn from each other. And during those days, I think NATO made a very real contribution with a no-fly zone and an arms embargo. Does that sound familiar? The world moves on, but our ability to impact it, our ability to be a force for good in the world continues. So I think the Balkans were very much part of NATO's history and SHAPE's history in the 1990s. Not only, of course, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, but later on in Kosovo, where today we still have over 5,000 NATO troops in the KFOR mission, creating a safe and secure environment. Again, something this headquarters should be very proud, and our predecessors should be very proud of their work in the Balkans. Next, please. Of course, today we are engaged in Afghanistan. 140,000 troops there. I believe that this is our #1 operational priority. Today, I am cautiously optimistic about our progress in Afghanistan. We are beginning a transition to be led by Afghan soldiers and police. President Karzai just announced the first 7 locations around Afghanistan under which 25% of the population of Afghanistan will now be protected under security operations led by Afghan police and military. That transition will continue through 2014, and this headquarters will be involved every step of the way, ensuring that this comes to a successful conclusion. Next, please. We're also embarked in piracy operations. Now, that's something I think would have been difficult for General Eisenhower to imagine, those 60 years ago. And yet today, every day, off the coast of Africa, we have a number of NATO ships that are operating with ships from the European Union, operating with ships from nations that are independently there, like Russia, China, India. There are coalitions that are built coming from the region to the north. So this is a very complex international operation in which NATO is not the lead, as we are in Afghanistan or the Balkans. This is an operation in which NATO is participating as part of a larger international effort. It's a very challenging mission. Today, I would say that this is an area that we need to put additional focus and resources on if we are going to solve it. So this is part of the spectrum of operations that SHAPE is involved in, here working through our Joint Forces Command in Lisbon, which has the charge for this mission. One, again, that I think 60 years ago would have been very hard to imagine. Next, please. Here's another set of images, powerful ones, of NATO and SHAPE responding to disaster. And we don't think about this enough, in my opinion. We are very focused on our combat role and our combat operations. It's important to remember that this headquarters, working through our Joint Forces Commands, has been deeply involved in operations in Pakistan, response to earthquake and flooding, in peacekeeping efforts, in supporting the African Union's peacekeeping efforts in the Darfur region, responding in the United States to Hurricane Katrina, one of the worst disasters ever to hit the United States, and of course operating in a humanitarian way, potentially in support of the situation in North Africa today. So this humanitarian work, I think, is important, and it's one that we will continue to be supportive of from this headquarters. Next, please. This is a very current photograph. It's taken in a Tunisian refugee camp. Today there are 200,000 refugees from the situation in Libya who are in Tunisia, probably almost as many in Egypt, some in the nations to the south. So this gathering humanitarian challenge is part of the NATO mandate under the UN Security Council resolution, and I think this is an area in which we may be more involved. At the moment, the international community, the non-governmental organizations are handling this reasonably well, but it's an area in which we must be prepared under our UN mandate to be supportive, part of our continuing efforts around the world. Next, please. This, of course, brings me to our operation today in Libya. Our military mission is very clear. It derives from the UN Security Council Resolution 1970, 1973. First, as I just mentioned, providing humanitarian assistance. Secondly, implementing the arms embargo. Thirdly, no-fly zone. fourthly, protecting the civilians. We understand this mission. It's clear. It comes to us from the United Nations mandate, and then through the NATO command structure. It's being executed today. NATO has full responsibility for this mission and is executing it through our Joint Force Command in Naples and a joint task force commanded by a Canadian 3-star general, Lieutenant General Charlie Bouchard, an Italian 3-star admiral operating out of Joint Maritime Component Command Naples and out of the Air Component Command in Izmir, Turkey. Of the 40 generals and admirals who are in charge of this mission, only 6 of them come from the United States. The rest of them come from all the other nations in NATO. This is very much an international effort and one that I think will be very important to us in the time going forward, which kind of brings us forward into the present. Next, please. Today, off of Libya, these are some of the NATO platforms that are in operation. I want to give a particular kudo, we would call it, a shout out, a compliment to our NATO AWACS team, led by Major General Steve Schmidt. They've been very responsive in setting up and helping us have eyes over this operation. Obviously, as a sailor, as a Navy admiral, I'm very proud of the 40 ships that are operating out of there. This is a significant maritime effort, and of course our aviators are deeply involved in this. So unlike Afghanistan, where the focus really is on ground operations, in this Libyan operation, these are the kinds of platforms that step up. And I think it tells us how significant and capable this alliance is to be able to take on challenges to very different parts of the world, to very different missions, using very different sets of forces, command and control strategically coming from SHAPE, moving down through our Joint Force Command, through the NATO command structure. Again, hard to think what General Eisenhower would have thought of all this, going back over those 60 years. But I'm very proud of the superb work that this headquarters is doing, making this a reality. Next, please. And just to give you a graphic on that, from 1996, these are operations we've been involved in. From Bosnia in 96, by 2000 we're in Kosovo and in many places. By 2010, of course, Afghanistan has become very large. Now we see a Libyan mission entering into this. So this operational expansion for this headquarters, Allied Command Operations, is very significant. And it tells the story of the extraordinary hard work that goes on here. Next, please. All this comes under our NATO strategic concept. Just signed last November. I was at the summit with all of the heads of state as this was signed. A fundamental, continuing, enduring mission of this alliance at the top of all is collective defense, Article 5. That's very clearly embedded in this strategic concept. And I want to draw a sharp line under that because that's what this alliance is about. But we also must be involved in the other kinds of operations that we have been charged to do. Because NATO, in the end, is part of a force for good in the world. I believe that. I believe that our work in the Balkans, in Afghanistan, in Libya, in so many places, is part of the legacy of SHAPE, part of the quality that all of you represent, and very much a part of the future of the alliance as well. Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be with you on this 60th anniversary. Happy birthday. Bon anniversaire. Thank you very much.
Would the following individuals please join the Admiral on the stage at this time? Colonel Uwe Klein, German Air Force. Captain Francois Tremembert, French Navy. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Fleet, Canadian Air Force. Lieutenant Colonel Chris Scully, British Army. Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence O'Connell, U.S. Army. Commander Nihat Baran, Turkish Navy. Commander Gary Klutz, U.S. Navy. Wing Commander Fraser Gray, Royal Air Force. Lieutenant Colonel Mark Phillips, British Army. Lieutenant Colonel Nils Magnussen, Norwegian Army. Commander Senior Grade Mogens Nielsen, Danish Navy. And Wing Commander Matthew Carleton, Royal Air Force. Okay. Let me read the first citation. Colonel Uwe Klein demonstrated the highest level of dedication and commitment in support of the SHAPE mission. From the initiation of prudent planning for the crisis in Libya through to the North Atlantic Council approval of the final O plan, Colonel Klein executed with distinction his responsibilities as the SHAPE Strategic Operations Planning Group, or SOPG, team leader. For 33 consecutive days, he led SOPG in the production of comprehensive O plans for NATO operations to support United Nations Security Council resolutions. The quality and timeliness of these SHAPE military plans enabled rapid and informed approval by the NATO Military Committee and the North Atlantic Council, and in turn, enabled the prompt response of NATO forces. Colonel Klein expertly integrated SHAPE personnel into an efficient and highly effective team with superior results. His personal drive, professional acumen, and tireless commitment contributed substantially to NATO's readiness to execute emergent, complex military operations of the highest priority to nations of the alliance. It is in recognition of his unsurpassed professionalism, integrity, and dedication to SHAPE and ACO that Admiral Stavridis hereby presents his commendation for exceptional service. Like to read the list again?
Yeah, please do.
Captain Francois Schremembert, French Navy. Lieutenant Colonel Paul Fleet, Canadian Air Force. Lieutenant Colonel Christopher Scully, British Army. Lieutenant Colonel Lawrence O'Connell, U.S. Army. Commander Nihat Beran, Turkish Navy. Commander Gary Klutz, U.S. Navy. Wing Commander Fraser Gray, Royal Air Force. Lieutenant Colonel Mark Phillips, British Army. Lieutenant Colonel Nils Magnuson, Norwegian Army. Commander Senior Grade Mogens Nielsen, Danish Navy. And Wing Commander Matthew Carlton, Royal Air Force.
Please hold your applause. I just want to add that I have 34 years in the armed forces, and I have operated with NATO. I've operated with many coalitions. I've obviously operated with my own nation. In my 34 years, I have not seen a more professional team move at speed to produce quality products upon which these operations are based. This is really an exceptional effort by this team. Please join me in a big round of applause for these.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this time we are happy to welcome General Sir Richard Sharif, General Manfred Lange, and Command Sergeant Major Michael Balch to join SACEUR on the stage. Also joining our SHAPE senior leadership on the stage at this time are Norwegian Navy Leading Rating Anuska Rhys Lilling and Turkish Army Corporal Idris Ayberdi, both born in 1990. And both among our most junior military members here at SHAPE. Thank you, Admiral, Generals, Chief, Special Cake Cutters. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, this concludes the auditorium portion of our special SHAPE 60th anniversary festivity today. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise and remain standing for the departure of the official party. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Carry on. We'll see you at the Silver Spoon. Thanks a lot. It was a great service.